This room isn't for people like you. The auctioneer's voice cut through the quiet like a sharp note, drawing every eye in the grand hall. Ava Montgomery paused at the threshold, her black flats silent against the polished oak floor, a simple black dress brushing just above her knees, her presence understated yet magnetic. The chandeliers above glinted off the rows of gleaming luxury watches displayed behind glass cases, each labeled with a starting bid higher than many would see in a lifetime. A murmur rose as the crowd glanced at her, whispers floating like invisible daggers through the air. "Are you lost, miss?" a young bidder sneered, adjusting his cufflinks and smirking as if the answer was obvious. Ava's gaze swept the room, steady, piercing, but her lips remained closed, a calm center amidst the rising tension. She moved forward, steps measured, the sound of her heels barely audible, yet commanding attention without a word. Phones discreetly raised, capturing every subtle motion. The auctioneer barked another order, dismissing her with a glance that carried disbelief. A faint smirk played across Ava's face as she approached the first display, her fingers brushing lightly over the velvet edges of a platinum watch, not touching the glass, merely observing. Time seemed to stretch, each second measured in the quickened heartbeat of the room. Guests began to shift uncomfortably, sensing a presence that demanded recognition without the need for announcement. Across the hall, her assistant's eyes met hers, a quiet acknowledgment, a nod that the protocol was in place. Ava remembered her first encounter with a room like this years ago, the sting of dismissal when her appearance didn't match expectations, the lesson that patience and observation were tools more powerful than noise or anger. Now, 2 decades later, that memory sharpened her focus, turned the current tension into a controlled energy that hummed quietly in the air. A guest laughed behind her, attempting to provoke, but Ava's calm, almost imperceptible smile was an unspoken challenge, a signal that she was more than she appeared. Security staff glanced at one another, sensing the shift, uncertain how to intervene against someone who seemed both so ordinary and yet unshakably poised. The room's chatter dimmed, cameras still rolling, eyes drawn as much to the unfolding story as to the watches themselves. Ava stood by the centerpiece display, her posture straight, the weight of silent authority settling over the crowd like a tangible presence. For a moment, the only sounds were the soft ticking of high-end timepieces, each tick marking the approach of the reveal no one yet anticipated. Every glance cast her way carried judgment, every whisper questioning her place. Ava breathed slowly, feeling the collective tension pulse through the hall, letting it rise, letting the room acknowledge the challenge without a single word from her. And just as the auctioneer raised the gavel, a subtle signal from her assistant hinted at the impending shift, the quiet before the storm where patience meets power, leaving the audience on the edge, knowing that in mere minutes the rules of this room were about to be rewritten. Ava Montgomery moved through the crowd with measured grace, her eyes scanning the room as murmurs continued to ripple behind her. The auction staff exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence faltering under her silent command. Each display case gleamed under the soft overhead lighting, showcasing watches with prices that could alter fortunes in a heartbeat. Yet Ava's focus was not on the numbers, but on the room itself, on the energy and assumptions that hung heavy in the air. She stopped briefly near a rare platinum timepiece, letting her fingertips hover above the glass as though testing the patience of the room itself. A young bidder, noticing her pause, attempted a subtle chuckle, nudging his neighbor with a comment about her attire being too casual for such a prestigious event, but Ava's gaze never wavered. Her assistant, standing a few feet away, gave a barely perceptible nod, signaling that the protocols they had established were ready to be enacted. Phones discreetly captured the unfolding tension, every subtle movement recorded as the hall waited for what no one yet realized was imminent. Ava's mind traced back to earlier experiences, to the times when her presence alone had been enough to draw skepticism and dismissive attitudes, and how she had learned to harness those moments into quiet strength rather than confrontation. She allowed herself a slow breath, the soft hum of the air conditioning punctuating the otherwise tense silence, and in that pause, the subtle shift of attention became apparent. Guests began to straighten in their seats, leaning forward, some adjusting their cameras, sensing that something pivotal was about to occur. The auctioneer, now noticeably unsettled, called out lot numbers mechanically, yet his voice carried the edge of uncertainty, betraying the awareness that the room's balance of power was shifting. Ava continued forward, stopping just behind the row of prospective bidders, and she gave a measured look, a silent statement that her presence was deliberate, her authority intact even without declaration. One staff member reached subtly for a ledger, a gesture meant to reinforce control, but hesitated, the weight of Ava's calm yet commanding presence halting any further action. The crowd's whispers rose slightly, fragments of conversation speculating on her identity, her demeanor, the quiet intensity that contrasted with the expected flamboyance of a participant at this level. Ava's lips remained closed, her eyes absorbing every reaction, calculating and patient, understanding that the perception of power often precedes its actual display. A subtle signal from her assistant confirmed that the verification systems were in place, ready to authenticate her rights without any confrontation. The room's atmosphere, once rigid and hierarchical, began to soften, anticipation mingling with unease, each tick of the grand clock on the wall marking the approach of a revelation that no one yet saw coming. Ava's posture remained straight, her expression serene, almost unassuming, yet the quiet authority she exuded began to ripple outward, affecting those around her, recalibrating their assumptions, and setting the stage for a moment of undeniable presence and influence that would soon transform the room completely. A subtle ripple passed through the room as Ava Montgomery moved closer to the center of the hall, her posture deliberate, composed, and entirely unhurried. The whispers around her grew, some voices questioning her presence, others speculating about who she might be, but no one could deny the quiet command she carried without a single word. A young bidder attempted to interrupt, pointing toward another display case as though diverting attention, yet Ava's calm glance halted the motion immediately, the power in her silence resonating more than any raised voice could have. Her assistant, standing slightly behind, kept one hand near a tablet, ready to verify her credentials and initiate the confirmation protocol, but there was no need for immediate action. The anticipation of recognition hung thick in the air. Ava's mind briefly drifted back to earlier auctions, the sting of dismissal and whispered judgments, the lessons she had internalized about patience, observation, and the slow accumulation of quiet authority. The room seemed to shrink around her as she approached the front of the display, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, reading reactions like a script written in real time. Security personnel shifted slightly, uncertain, sensing the tension, yet unsure how to assert control over someone whose calm presence defied their usual assumptions. A murmur rose from a corner where a group of guests had begun capturing the scene on their phones, the subtle click of camera shutters mixing with the faint hum of conversation as the hall collectively held its breath. Ava stopped at the edge of the central platform, fingers lightly brushing the edges of the display without touching the watches themselves, a gesture that spoke volumes about awareness and restraint. The auctioneer's tone had shifted, the usual cadence of calling lots replaced by tentative statements, a thin veneer of control showing cracks under the weight of Ava's composed demeanor. She allowed herself a measured inhale, drawing the room into her rhythm, the collective pulse of curiosity and uncertainty synchronized with her own heartbeat. The bidders shifted in their seats, some leaning forward to get a better view, some adjusting recording devices, yet no one dared interrupt her. Stillness. In that slow moment, the subtle shift in the room became undeniable. The quiet authority she exuded had begun to reshape the assumptions of everyone present, recalibrating the social dynamics in real time. Her assistant gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a signal that everything was ready, verification systems active, and the time for revelation was approaching. The atmosphere, once rigid and formal, now vibrated with a palpable tension, the anticipation of what was about to unfold stretching the seconds into an almost cinematic pause. Ava's eyes met the gaze of several guests who had been skeptical, and in that exchange, the understanding passed silently. She was here, she was aware, and she was in complete control. Each subtle movement she made drew attention. Every careful breath amplified the stillness, and the room, initially full of judgment and quiet derision, now weighted with a mix of apprehension and awe, knowing that the unfolding moment would soon redefine the expectations of power, presence, and authority within these walls. A subtle tension spread through the auction hall as Ava Montgomery moved closer to the center display, her eyes scanning every observer, reading their unspoken judgments and guesses with an almost tangible precision. The murmurs grew louder, fragmented phrases floating through the air as the crowd speculated about her identity, yet no one dared challenge the calm authority she projected. Phones lifted discreetly, recording the subtle yet commanding presence that Ava maintained, the soft tap of her heels against the polished oak floor echoing like a measured heartbeat through the hall. A staff member, previously confident, adjusted the catalog on the podium, pausing mid-motion as Ava's gaze swept over him, unflinching, piercing, and precise. She remembered a similar room decades ago, where whispers and glances had tried to define her worth, and how patience, observation, and quiet resolve had transformed every moment of dismissal into opportunity. The auctioneer's voice faltered slightly, the cadence of calling lots interrupted by the palpable shift in the room, the once rigid hierarchy bending subtly under Ava's composed authority. A young bidder leaned forward, attempting a remark about her understated attire, but Ava's controlled glance, calm and deliberate, silenced the effort before a word could fully form. Her assistant, standing a few steps behind, mirrored her stillness, ready to initiate the verification protocol at any sign, but waiting for her silent cue. The air seemed charged, every footstep, every whispered conversation weighted by anticipation, as if the hall itself had become an extension of Ava's control, reacting to her measured presence. Guests shifted in their seats, some leaning to get a better angle with their cameras, others straightening in realization that the ordinary exterior belied extraordinary command. Security personnel hesitated, recognizing the authority emanating from someone who did not need to assert it verbally, the quiet influence reshaping assumptions without confrontation. Ava paused near the central platform, fingers grazing the velvet edges of the cases in a gesture that spoke of awareness, restraint, and anticipation rather than impatience or assertion. Each movement, each breath, each subtle eye contact contributed to the growing realization that the room was no longer in its usual order, that the power dynamics had shifted in a subtle, undeniable way. The hall, once filled with casual confidence and quiet competition, now held a collective pause, a recognition that something significant was about to unfold, and the entire audience, conscious of cameras capturing every reaction, leaned into the suspense of the moment. Ava's calm presence acted as a magnet for attention, drawing the scattered energy of whispers, shifting chairs, and recorded glances into a single, focused current that pulsed around her. Every second stretched, the room collectively holding its breath, the subtle hum of anticipation amplifying the quiet promise of revelation. Ava's eyes met the gaze of several observers, and in that exchange, an understanding passed silently. She was here, she was deliberate, and she was entirely in control, and the consequences of her next moves would reverberate through the hall in ways no one could yet predict. A shift began to ripple through the auction hall as Ava Montgomery's presence continued to assert itself, subtle yet undeniable, drawing the attention and curiosity of every person in the room. The murmurs that had once been laced with skepticism and judgment began to waver, uncertainty creeping into the confident postures of the staff and bidders alike. Ava's assistant stood close by, discreetly preparing the verification systems while Ava remained composed, her movements deliberate, her focus unwavering. She walked slowly along the central aisle, her gaze sweeping the crowd, noting every raised camera, every tilted head, every whispered conversation, cataloging the reactions as if they were pieces of a larger puzzle she was quietly solving. A young bidder attempted a jest, raising his voice to comment on her simple attire, but Ava's calm, piercing look conveyed more authority than any words could have, and the bidder fell silent, a flush of hesitation crossing his face. Across the hall, a group of regular patrons leaned forward, whispering among themselves, trying to reconcile the quiet confidence they were witnessing with their expectations of what a participant in this high-stakes auction should look like. The auctioneer, now visibly uncertain, called out the next lot numbers with less conviction, his usual rhythm disrupted by the growing sense that the room's dynamics had subtly shifted under Ava's unspoken command. She paused near the row of platinum and gold timepieces, her fingers hovering just above the display cases without touching them, signaling observation and control, an unspoken reminder of her awareness of every detail. The staff shifted, glancing at one another, unsure how to respond to someone whose calm presence seemed to redraw the invisible lines of authority in the hall. The soft hum of air conditioning, the subtle clicking of cameras, and the faint rustle of papers provided a rhythmic backdrop to the collective anticipation building around her. Ava's mind briefly traced back to earlier experiences, recalling the rooms where she had been dismissed, underestimated, or overlooked, and how those memories had been transformed into a patient, observational strength that now radiated quietly throughout the hall. Each subtle movement she made, each controlled breath, each measured step communicated more than words ever could, influencing the crowd, aligning their attention, and drawing a sense of shared expectation toward the moment that would soon unfold. Her assistant gave a barely perceptible nod, signaling that all systems were active and ready, yet Ava remained still, allowing the room to absorb her presence fully before initiating the next move. The audience, sensing the change, leaned forward, some whispering to one another, others raising their cameras slightly higher to capture every detail, the room collectively holding its breath as anticipation swelled. In that suspended moment, the quiet authority of Ava Montgomery reshaped the energy of the hall, tilting it in her favor, commanding attention not through words or confrontation, but through presence, precision, and the promise of an impending revelation that would soon redefine the understanding of power and recognition within that room. Ava Montgomery's calm presence began to crystallize the attention of everyone in the auction hall, the room now fully attuned to her movements and quiet authority. The whispers among bidders had grown into a low murmur of curiosity and speculation, all eyes tracking her as she moved with precise, measured steps toward the central platform. She paused briefly at the edge of the velvet-lined display, her gaze flicking from the crowd to each meticulously arranged timepiece, noting the reactions of both staff and participants. The auctioneer, sensing the shift in energy, cleared his throat nervously, the practiced cadence of calling lot numbers faltering under the weight of Ava's composed authority. Ava's assistant, positioned discreetly behind her, gave a subtle hand signal, confirming that verification systems were ready and awaiting her command. Ava's focus remained sharp, her mind reviewing the sequence of events, the gestures of those around her, cataloging the assumptions and expectations that had guided the room until this moment. A young staff member, previously confident, hesitated, caught between protocol and the subtle command of Ava's presence, unsure of how to proceed as her calm intensity radiated outward. Guests leaned forward, their cameras raised to capture the tension, the flicker of anticipation evident in their eyes as they waited for the moment that would inevitably redefine the hierarchy in the hall. Ava paused once more, her hand hovering lightly above the edge of a particularly rare platinum timepiece, a silent statement of observation and control. The soft click of high-end cameras, the hum of conversation, and the faint shuffle of feet were the only sounds accompanying the palpable silence that had settled over the space, every participant aware that a revelation was imminent. Ava's memory drifted briefly to similar moments from her past, the countless occasions where she had been underestimated or dismissed, and how those experiences had honed her ability to observe, wait, and assert power through presence rather than confrontation. Each movement she made, each deliberate shift in her posture, communicated authority more convincingly than any spoken word could, reshaping the assumptions of the room without a single raised voice. The staff and security personnel exchanged uncertain glances, sensing that their usual roles had been quietly disrupted, the room's dynamics now subtly aligned with Ava's silent command. Phones and cameras captured the scene, the anticipation in the room amplified as everyone sensed the unfolding change. The collective energy now focused on her. A faint nod from her assistant confirmed that the systems were fully engaged and ready to verify her authority. Yet Ava remained still, letting the room absorb the weight of her presence before any action was taken. The crowd's murmurs slowed, replaced by attentive observation, each person unconsciously adjusting their expectations, their perceptions of status and influence bending to accommodate the quiet power emanating from Ava Montgomery. In that tense, suspended moment, the auction hall had shifted from a space of routine proceedings into a stage of anticipation, every eye, every camera, every breath collectively waiting for the moment when Ava's authority would be revealed and the assumptions of the room would be permanently recalibrated. A sudden shift in the room's energy became unmistakable as Ava Montgomery straightened her posture and let her gaze sweep slowly across the crowd, each step deliberate, every movement measured with a calm authority that seemed to stretch through the space without a single word being spoken. The murmurs that had been rising moments before now faltered as eyes turned fully toward her, the collective attention of bidders, staff, and onlookers converging on a single presence that seemed to command the room merely by being there. Phones and cameras were raised higher, capturing every subtle motion, every slight smile, every controlled gesture, as if the audience understood that something significant was about to unfold. The auctioneer, visibly tense, paused mid-call, eyes flicking to Ava and then to his assistants, who whispered hurriedly amongst themselves, the usual flow of the event disrupted by the quiet intensity she projected. Ava's assistant gave a barely perceptible nod, signaling that all verification protocols were ready, yet Ava remained calm, letting the anticipation build naturally, allowing the room to feel the weight of her presence before taking further action. Across the hall, a group of seasoned bidders exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the subtle shift in authority, the quiet assertion of power without any overt declaration. Ava's eyes lingered on a particularly rare timepiece in the center display, her fingers hovering just above the glass, a gesture of observation and patience rather than engagement, yet conveying more influence than any raised voice could. A staff member approached, ledger in hand, uncertain how to respond, hesitating as Ava's gaze met theirs, steady, deliberate, and unyielding. Guests leaned forward in their seats, whispering to each other, speculation mixing with awe as the realization settled in that the woman before them held far more authority than appearances suggested. The soft hum of the ventilation system, the quiet rustle of programs, and the subtle click of cameras provided a rhythm that underscored the tension, a calm yet charged undercurrent that seemed to wrap the entire hall in anticipation. Ava remembered similar moments from her past, instances where her presence had been underestimated, where whispers and glances attempted to define her worth, and how she had honed the skill of turning quiet observation into undeniable influence. Each breath she took, each controlled step, each nuanced glance served to align the attention of the room, subtly commanding recognition and respect without the need for confrontation or declaration. The crowd's whispers slowed, replaced by a focused observation, everyone aware that the next move would set the tone for the remainder of the auction, altering perceptions and expectations simultaneously. Ava's calm authority, precise and deliberate, had already begun to recalibrate the room's dynamics, and in the collective pause, the entire hall seemed to wait with bated breath, sensing that the culmination of this quiet power was imminent, and that the assumptions and hierarchy of the space were about to be irreversibly transformed. Ava Montgomery's gaze remained steady as she reached the center of the hall, the glow from the overhead chandeliers reflecting off the platinum and gold timepieces, each one catching fragments of light like small stars suspended in glass. The audience, previously shifting in idle conversation and speculative whispers, now leaned forward as if drawn magnetically toward her presence, their anticipation sharpening with every subtle movement she made. A soft rustle moved through the rows of chairs as cameras clicked and smartphones were discreetly adjusted, capturing every detail, every controlled gesture that communicated her authority more effectively than any spoken word could. The auctioneer hesitated, his practiced cadence disrupted, hands gripping the podium as he tried to maintain composure while the room's energy subtly but undeniably shifted in Ava's favor. Ava's assistant stood close, discreetly holding a tablet ready to authenticate her identity and verify her rights to the lots. Yet the pause was deliberate, allowing the room to absorb the weight of her quiet command. Ava allowed her eyes to drift to a particularly rare display, a watch set in platinum with diamonds subtly embedded, its craftsmanship reflecting the precision she herself embodied. She inhaled slowly, letting the tension build, knowing that patience and observation had become her most formidable tools, a quiet strength that had been honed over years of being underestimated. A young bidder whispered something to his neighbor, the words carrying a hint of mockery, but Ava's controlled glance silenced any further commentary, a simple expression conveying complete understanding and unspoken authority. Security staff subtly adjusted their positions, their usually assured stance tinged with uncertainty, aware that the presence before them commanded a different level of respect and attention. The crowd collectively exhaled, a shared sense of expectation settling over the hall as every participant realized that the ordinary appearance before them masked an extraordinary command, a force of patience, calculation, and authority that had been building quietly all along. Ava's movements were deliberate, each step measured to draw attention without overt display, aligning the energy of the room with the subtle gravity of her presence. The soft hum of the ventilation, the quiet shuffle of programs, and the gentle clicks of cameras created an almost rhythmic backdrop to the tension, punctuating the anticipation that now hung thick in the air. Ava recalled similar moments from her earlier experiences in high-stakes settings, times when she had been underestimated or dismissed, and how those memories had been transformed into calm observation and strategic control. The air in the room seemed to respond, the energy of judgment and doubt fading, replaced by a collective focus, a silent acknowledgment that the next move would define the room's dynamic entirely. Ava's eyes briefly connected with several guests who had been skeptical, a subtle but unmistakable signal passing between them, an understanding that the quiet power she exuded would soon manifest in ways that no one had yet anticipated, reshaping the hierarchy of the auction hall before a single gavel had fallen. Ava Montgomery finally raised her hand slightly, a subtle motion that drew the room's attention like a magnet, signaling her assistant to initiate the verification protocol she had quietly prepared. The staff paused, uncertain, glancing at one another as the system confirmed her credentials, each alert quietly pinging across the network without fanfare, but enough to shift the balance of authority in the room. Ava's eyes swept across the crowd, noting the shift in posture, the slight straightening of backs, the tentative nods of acknowledgment from those who had moments ago questioned her presence. Phones and cameras captured every instant, the quiet anticipation rippling through the audience as every whispered speculation began to settle into stunned recognition. A subtle smile crossed her face, the kind that conveyed calm assurance, a silent reminder that observation and patience had been as crucial as any action she would take next. The auctioneer's voice faltered as he attempted to regain control, but the room's energy had already aligned with Ava's presence, each observer subconsciously acknowledging the authority that had quietly built throughout the morning. A young bidder, who had previously sneered at her attire, now shifted uneasily, his smile fading as he realized that the woman standing before them had orchestrated the entire sequence without a single overt declaration, her quiet command rendering previous assumptions obsolete. Security personnel exchanged looks, subtle but telling, realizing that intervention was unnecessary, that authority had been asserted without confrontation or display, and that the room had already responded accordingly. Ava's gaze returned to the central display, letting her fingers hover slightly above the rare platinum and diamond-encrusted watches, her measured presence alone dictating the room's pace and attention. Guests leaned forward, whispering to each other with a mixture of awe and disbelief, the cameras capturing not just the watches, but the subtle recalibration of the hall's dynamics in real time. The soft hum of the ventilation, the shuffle of chairs, and the faint clicks of devices punctuated the tense stillness, each sound a reminder of the collective anticipation holding the room in a suspended moment. Ava's mind traced back to her past experiences in similar high-stakes environments, recalling the subtle judgments, the whispered doubts, and the dismissals she had endured, and how those moments had honed her capacity for calm, deliberate command. Each subtle gesture now reinforced her authority, reshaping assumptions and expectations in the room, aligning the audience with the narrative she had quietly constructed. The hall, once filled with idle chatter and speculative commentary, now held a collective, anticipatory silence, each individual attuned to the moment, aware that the unfolding actions would redefine perception, power, and control within these walls, and that the quiet yet undeniable presence of Ava Montgomery had irrevocably altered the dynamic of the auction floor. Ava Montgomery finally allowed herself a small, deliberate smile, the kind that carried quiet authority without a hint of arrogance, as her assistant tapped a sequence on the tablet, confirming the verification of her rights to every lot displayed in the auction hall. The staff, previously tense and uncertain, began to shift uncomfortably, realizing that the woman they had subtly dismissed and underestimated now held undeniable control over the proceedings. Guests leaned forward in their seats, whispering to one another in hushed tones, some recording, some simply absorbing the moment as the balance of power had silently realigned. The auctioneer cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure, yet the rhythm of the event had been interrupted by the subtle, yet absolute authority radiating from Ava, each movement of hers commanding attention and respect without a single raised voice. A young bidder who had earlier mocked her attire now lowered his gaze, caught in the realization that the quiet presence before him was anything but ordinary. Security personnel adjusted their positions cautiously, recognizing the shift in influence, aware that the room had already acknowledged Ava's authority through sheer observation and perception. Ava walked slowly along the central aisle, her eyes scanning the crowd, registering every raised camera, every slight adjustment in posture, and every whispered conversation, cataloging reactions as part of the careful orchestration she had quietly executed from the beginning. The atmosphere thickened with anticipation, the soft hum of ventilation, the subtle rustle of programs, and the clicking of devices underscoring the collective attention focused entirely on her. Ava paused at the edge of a particularly rare display of platinum timepieces, her hand hovering just above the glass, signaling observation and control, a silent assertion that she was fully aware of every detail and every expectation surrounding her. Memories of past experiences, moments of dismissal and underestimated potential, briefly surfaced in her mind, reinforcing her patience, her calm, and the precision with which she now exerted influence without overt display. Each breath she took, each measured movement, each subtle glance continued to align the room's attention, the energy of the crowd bending toward recognition of her quiet, calculated power. Guests and staff alike now shared a moment of collective acknowledgment, the anticipation of the next move palpable, the room holding its breath in quiet suspense. Ava's presence, deliberate and unyielding, had transformed the hall from a space of casual competition into a stage of tension and expectation, where every observer understood that the unfolding events would irrevocably redefine authority, perception, and influence within these walls, and that the culmination of this quiet command was now inevitable and imminent. Ava Montgomery took a slow, deliberate step closer to the central display, the room now fully captivated by her composed presence. The auctioneer's voice had faltered completely, the rhythm of calling lots replaced by a cautious, hesitant tone, as if he were aware that the room's energy had shifted irreversibly. Guests leaned forward, some holding their breath, others whispering to neighbors, phones raised to capture the unfolding moment as Ava's calm authority seemed to permeate the hall. She allowed her gaze to move methodically from one bidder to the next, silently acknowledging those who had been skeptical and observing the subtle shifts in posture. The quiet adjustments of staff, the tentative glances exchanged between security personnel. Her assistant, still standing close but unobtrusive, subtly confirmed that verification had been completed, yet Ava did not move immediately, letting the weight of anticipation settle fully over the crowd. Every step, every slight tilt of her head, communicated intent, reinforcing the quiet dominance she held over the space. The light from the chandeliers reflected in the platinum and gold timepieces, catching shards of brilliance that seemed to mirror the tension and focus radiating from Ava. A young bidder, previously confident and mocking, shifted uneasily in his seat, realizing that the woman before him had orchestrated the room's attention without any need for confrontation, her authority manifesting solely through presence and meticulous timing. The murmurs of speculation were replaced by an attentive silence, punctuated only by the soft hum of ventilation and the subtle clicks of cameras. Ava paused again, her fingers hovering lightly above a rare diamond-encrusted watch, signaling observation and control rather than engagement, the quiet precision of her movements commanding recognition from every corner of the hall. She drew a slow, measured breath, the subtle rhythm aligning with the collective pulse of the audience, every eye following her, every movement observed, every assumption quietly challenged. Security staff shifted minutely, their certainty tempered by the understanding that no immediate action was necessary, that the authority in the room had been asserted through presence, poise, and the invisible command of anticipation. Guests whispered among themselves, sharing a mixture of awe, disbelief, and excitement as the hall transformed from a place of routine proceedings into a space of focused tension, all centered on Ava Montgomery and the unfolding promise of decisive revelation. The soft background noises, the shuffle of programs, the quiet clicks of phones, the faint murmurs, served only to highlight the stillness of Ava's control, the calm eye in the center of a storm that had formed organically around her presence. She briefly recalled past experiences where she had been underestimated or overlooked, moments that had trained her in the art of quiet power, in the skill of turning observation into influence, and how those lessons had prepared her for this exact moment. Every controlled movement, every deliberate glance, every subtle shift in posture aligned the room's energy toward recognition of her authority, the collective anticipation mounting as the moment approached when her next action would irrevocably define the balance of power within the hall and command the awe and respect of every observer present. Ava Montgomery finally stepped fully into the center of the auction hall, the room's tension coalescing around her in a near-visible pulse as every gaze fixed firmly upon her. The subtle hum of anticipation seemed to quiet the whispers, leaving only the soft clicks of recording devices as the audience held their breath, sensing that the moment of revelation was at hand. Ava's assistant gave a slight nod, confirming that all verification systems were fully operational, yet Ava maintained her composed stance, allowing the weight of her presence to speak before any action was taken. She lifted her hand slowly, gesturing toward the array of platinum and gold timepieces, and the crowd leaned forward, a silent acknowledgment passing among them that the ordinary exterior they had judged was now eclipsed by undeniable authority. The auctioneer, his voice faltering, attempted to continue, but the rhythm of the event had been overtaken by the force of Ava's composed command, each observer acutely aware that her control was now absolute. A young bidder who had earlier mocked her attire swallowed his words, the faint flush on his cheeks betraying a sudden recognition of her influence. Guests and staff alike shifted subtly, realigning their attention, understanding that the room's hierarchy had been quietly, yet decisively, rewritten. Ava's eyes scanned the crowd, registering the ripple of awe, curiosity, and tentative respect that spread with every measured step she took, every slight turn of her head, every deliberate pause. The soft hum of ventilation, the subtle shuffling of chairs, and the quiet murmurs punctuated the charged silence, emphasizing the gravity of the moment as she prepared to make her move. Memories of earlier experiences, where she had been underestimated, ignored, or dismissed, flickered through her mind, reinforcing the precision with which she now exerted influence through calm observation and strategic presence. Each motion she made, each glance cast across the hall, each measured breath, realigned assumptions, reshaped expectations, and focused the collective anticipation on what she would do next. The staff, previously confident and in control, now hesitated, sensing that authority had quietly shifted without a single raised voice or overt command. The audience, fully attuned to the subtle orchestration, held their collective breath, aware that the next moment would transform the room's dynamics entirely, acknowledging the quiet yet undeniable power emanating from Ava Montgomery. Cameras and smartphones captured every instant, not just the displays, but the unfolding recognition that presence, patience, and measured action had asserted authority far more convincingly than words ever could. The hall seemed to lean in as if the space itself awaited her next move, the culmination of careful observation, quiet control, and deliberate action poised to redefine both perception and power in the room, leaving every observer on the edge of understanding that the revelation was imminent and irreversible. Ava Montgomery raised her hand with quiet authority, and with a subtle motion to her assistant, the verification systems confirmed her ownership of every lot in the hall. The realization rippled through the audience instantly, a wave of astonishment and respect cascading across faces that had moments ago doubted her presence. Cameras captured the reactions, whispers turning to audible murmurs of recognition as the staff and bidders alike began to understand the depth of her quiet power. The auctioneer hesitated, the gavel poised mid-air, eyes flicking toward Ava as if seeking permission or confirmation, aware that the room's hierarchy had already shifted irreversibly. Ava's smile remained calm, composed, and deliberate, a silent assertion of control that required no words, yet communicated volumes. Guests leaned forward, cameras elevated, some whispering to their neighbors, others simply absorbing the moment, sensing the culmination of attention that had been building since her arrival. The staff adjusted cautiously, previously confident gestures now tempered by the acknowledgement that authority had been redefined by presence and deliberate timing. Ava moved to the central display, her fingers hovering lightly over the glass cases, observing, precise, and in command, each step reinforcing the quiet assertion of influence she had orchestrated. Security personnel subtly shifted, recognizing that intervention was unnecessary, that the demonstration of authority needed no confrontation, and that the room itself had aligned with her measured presence. The soft hum of the ventilation, the faint rustle of programs, and the clicking of devices underscored the collective focus, a rhythm punctuating the hall's suspense as Ava prepared to act. Memories of past dismissals, underestimations, and overlooked potential flickered in her mind, reinforcing the precision and patience that now commanded attention without a single raised voice. Guests and staff collectively absorbed the weight of her presence, the quiet power transforming skepticism into acknowledgment, tension into respect, and anticipation into shared understanding. Each measured breath, every subtle movement, every deliberate glance aligned the room's energy toward the inevitable revelation, a moment that would redefine perception and command throughout the hall. Ava's eyes swept across the crowd once more, noting subtle shifts, fleeting expressions of awe, tentative smiles, and quiet acknowledgement, knowing that the stage was set, the audience prepared, and that in the following moments, her quiet authority would reach its apex, leaving no doubt of her presence, influence, and the full extent of control she had exercised silently from the very beginning. The hall, once full of murmurs, speculation, and idle observation, now held a shared, suspended attention, each observer aware that Ava Montgomery had orchestrated the unfolding of events with meticulous precision, culminating in a silent but undeniable declaration of power and ownership that resonated throughout every corner of the space.